Well, Alistair, thank you so much for joining me at Studio 360 at Refreshed RESi360. I understand this is your first time attending Resi. How are you finding it?
Great. It's brilliant environment, and it's great to see so many different people here from the different parts of the sector.
And you get quite a thought-provoking talk on putting purpose before profit. Before we delve into what that might look practically in the housing sector, could you give a little bit of background about yourself and what Goscombe is doing? So I think you mentioned during your talk about getting ex-offenders on site. Yeah. So I think it'd be quite good for people to have a bit of context in terms of what your company's doing.
Well, the whole basis of it was to try and reverse the traditional view where people put profit first and then purpose comes as almost like an add-on, as a CSR. The CSR is great, but it's not necessarily doing what we need to do in this country for community and social. And so we've kind of flipped that model to set it up as a business that deliberately looks at social value. So a profit with purpose business that then uses house building as the vehicle to deliver the social impact.
And what does purpose before profit look like in a sort of practical sense from a housing delivery viewpoint? Because arguably that's what a lot of housing associations do. Though granted they don't have a profit, they call it an account surplus.
Yeah. I think it's what I said when I was speaking this morning. It's about the ability for everything you do within an organisation to be coloured by the purpose as opposed to the profit. So, I came from a background where I had a finance director who everything I wanted to do would be challenged to say, can we afford to do it, or should we be doing it, or does it give us the maximum return? Putting it into the context of a housing company, you go to a local authority and you tender for something, and they will then tend to go for the cheapest. Not the cheapest in terms of quality, but the cheapest in terms of price. Yeah. And this is about saying there's a different way of looking at business decisions, and it first of all says, are we providing the best value for the community from the decisions that we take? So it's profit, it's the and model I referred to, which is profit and purpose. But purpose runs all the way through. It's a bit like an operating system for software, runs all the way through the business that we have.
And for organisations that maybe, obviously the listed house builders, they've got shareholders to answer to, even private companies will have investors they have to answer to. What can they be doing at either sort of micro level or a big picture level to inject more a sense of purpose and social value without sort of eating into their returns, or do we have to kind of flip the whole profit-driven model on its head? Is it possible to sort of add social value while still being profit-driven?
Well, yes, from an investor's point of view, our investors get involved because they've got a passion for the work that's being done, and it's not for everybody. I mean, you won't necessarily get go into the city to the normal lenders and expect them to put money into a patient capital type impact investing. Yeah. It's a certain type of investor that is prepared to take a slightly lower return on their equity, but as a result of that, they're getting social impact as well. And that's the bit that's kind of interesting to me, is because there are a lot of people out there that are in that position. They're prepared to invest in community, but they still want a bit to come back.
And do you think that it's become almost a bit passé to say that people talk about the E but not about the S, and then they don't talk about the G really? But with the big focus right now on sort of sustainability driven primarily by the energy crisis, so there's a sort of hard-nosed pragmatism to a lot of the conversations we're having there. Is there a risk that social value is going to be squeezed because people are focusing on trying to make sure they don't lose profitability, but also making sure that they have an environmental impact? So right now that's a high agenda.
Well, I mean, in a traditional model, I would say there is, because it's almost like a counterweight, a balance. So if you trade off on profits, you can put more into social impact. But actually, if you think about it a different way, which is the whole principle about this business model, you start thinking about, well, once you get a tenant or a resident sitting inside your property, it's not just about the cost of the house or what it's cost you to build it, but it's the cost of operating it as well. And if you really are looking at community and social impacts, you've got to start considering things like the fuel poverty. What's the impact on their disposable income if you've got a property that is not fuel efficient? So the ESG aspect on this impacts beyond just the building of the house.
And we've obviously got a government right now that are putting growth at all costs. forward, and some of the left-wing criticism has been there that actually what that means is profit before all costs. What's your take on? Admittedly, we've got the mini budget as it's been referred to on Friday, so we've only got sort of whisperings on what's been briefed in the papers. But what's your take on that?
Well, I think the whole thing is not, as I said in my talk, it's not just about building back better, and it's not just about saying can we build 340,000 new homes next year. There is to get this model to really work, you've got to put some investment behind the scenes into helping developers, builders, house providers, whatever, to do something with the social impact as well. There needs to be this kind of incentive in the same way as there is with the green energy and so on. There needs to be incentives put behind it to make sure that people are really going to invest in community. Otherwise, you'll just end up with somebody who does this purpose by convenience. It's done because they have to do it.
And we've seen the rise in the UK of for-profit registered providers, and maybe they would argue that actually by simply providing affordable housing, they are having a positive social impact. What would you say to that if there was hypothetically?
What's affordable housing? Because I would argue that
there's a legal definition to it, no?
The legal definition at the moment is not necessarily affordable. But if you started to flip that model around and said that using the Tom's model that I was explaining earlier, if there is a way
Could
of
you explain the
offsetting-
Tom's model for people who may have not been in the
Yeah, I mean, the Tom's model is very, very simply to, being able to buy an asset or acquire an asset and sell it on the open market at a profit, and using some of that profit to offset against the cost of an affordable home. Now, all we're doing in our model really is taking some of that profit and saying if we've got an asset that hasn't cost us anything because it's been bought with your profit, then I could, in theory, come to you and offer you that to rent at £100 per month. Now, we wouldn't do that because you wouldn't make money. You've got to make profit, otherwise your social impact falls over. But if I was in Eastbourne, back in my hometown, and the LHA rate is £800 per month on average, say, and I went to them and said I can offer you this house at £600, I've now saved them 25% on their housing budget, but I've made myself £600 per month in terms of profit and revenue. Now, that then gives you the scope to make the houses affordable relative to the income for the person that's going into that house. It's a completely different way of looking at how do you charge for tenancies. That's what we would see as affordable housing, not necessarily 80% of market rent.
Okay, and lastly, just to finish, you use Patagonia as a good example of a purpose-driven business. The cynics say that actually what he was doing was trying to avoid a rather hefty tax bill. But going beyond that, I saw a few eyebrows raised when you pointed to the example that they banned Wall Street bankers from buying and wearing their fleeces. Is that genuinely purpose-driven, or is that sort of cheap signalling of virtue?
I think your guess is as good as mine. I couldn't comment on that, but Patagonia is amongst a cohort of businesses where if you said to me which ones actually stand out as really living by their purpose, then I would say Patagonia, for all the right or wrong reasons, seem to be doing it more right than many other organisations are doing it.
So you would say that there's a learning there for the residential industry?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely, I do. And it just takes, as I said, right at the very end, it's the challenge is it's for the leaderships, and I'm not talking of political leadership, I'm talking about
corporate
the
leadership.
Chief execs, the corporate executives to be courageous and really do something about shifting the shape and the structure of their businesses to enable this.
All right, well, Alistair, thank you so much. I hope those words that people in the industry take away.
Good. Thank you for your time.
No worries.